Yeah, so I've been with you guys a number of times, and the last times I was here, I was North Shore's groups pastor, and now I'm here also as North Shore's groups pastor, but also your interim pastor. So I've moved on up, so to speak. So yeah, if you weren't here for... I'm still learning how things are called around here. At North Shore, we would call it a family meeting. I don't know what you guys call it, but Clint introduced me as kind of we're doing a little partnership with North Shore, and that I'm coming in as a part-time at North Shore now and part-time over here, and just getting us through, I shouldn't say getting us through, just offering some stability as you guys explore your senior pastor search and look for long-term plans and all that sort of thing. And so I'm going to be here until you find someone, probably. So we've at least committed through the end of the year till about December. And if it goes longer, I'd love to be here longer. If you find someone tomorrow, that's great too. So I'm just here for the ride and willing to help in any way possible. And so I'll be here most Sundays, and then during the week I'm in the office about 2 days a week and 2 days a week at North Shore. And I just love just kind of the heart behind this whole partnership is really just spreading the kingdom of God, both for Edgewood and North Shore. Just the vision is to go, this is all about a kingdom win, and to just see the kingdom expand. And so I love that North Shore was willing to kind of just go, hey, we can take some things off your plate, Stan, so that we can go support Edgewood for a season and just allow them to have some margin as they figure some things out. So I'll be around. April in particular is a little bit squishy because it's like I had to hand off some things and I'll be in the office over there a little bit more. But then come May, June, July, it'll be pretty regular. But we have our Sundays figured out, and that was kind of the most important thing to figure out right now. So one of the desires out of this season is to really just have a bit more consistency and stability on Sunday mornings. I know some of the guys who have been speaking here, and I was one of the guys who was speaking here. And each week it's kind of a different thing, and there's a lot of great things that come out of that. But when you know that you have a regular speaker, you can kind of do something like a series or go through a book of the Bible. And so that's really what we'd like to see happen over this season. And so as I was praying about what would be a good book to go through, I arrived on the Gospel of Luke. And so we're going to be in Luke 1 through 4 this morning. If you've got a Bible, Luke 1 through 4. And part of the reason I picked a gospel, even though that would feel like, well, we might not even get to the end of it by the end of December, but part of the reason is because we will all benefit from knowing more about Jesus. Right? Like if you guys find a senior pastor tomorrow and I'm out of here and you never see me again, you will have benefited from knowing more about Jesus. And if we make it to the end of the book, we'll all have benefited from knowing more about Jesus. And everything that we know about Jesus is just going to lay more and more groundwork for the rest of our lives. And so that's why we landed on Luke. And we're going to kind of take it chapter and verse, so to speak. We'll go at various paces. You'll kind of see what I mean with this. Of a lot of things that are in there are put in there thematically or with some redundancy. So I don't know if we'll go through every story, but we'll go through all the big highlights of kind of different points in Luke and that sort of thing. But this morning, we're just going to look at verses 1 through 4, and they are really the introduction to Luke. And since we're only going to look at verses 1 through 4, we have some margin to kind of do some unique things this morning. And so, when you're new, you get the benefit of the doubt. People are willing to try things with you. You may hate what we're about to do, and that's okay. You can tell me afterwards. Normally, I joke when I know that I'm about to do something that someone's going to dislike, that you can send the emails to the senior pastor, but right now, I guess those emails go to me. So, I don't know who else you send them to. But here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you discuss with the people sitting around you. I know this is scary for a big church, but this is a very normal thing to do in a youth group setting. Have you talk with the people next to you. Ideally, I would like for you to talk with people who you didn't come to church. I want you to cross the aisle, cross the bridge, talk with someone maybe you don't know, and I'm going to give you the topic. Okay, so here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to share with the people next to you a time where you felt really certain about what God was doing. A time where you felt really certain about what God was doing. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I want you to share a legitimate story. And if you run out of things to say, or you cover all the moments in your life where you felt really certain that God was doing something, then go on to share about a time where you were really uncertain about what God was doing. So take 5 minutes, talk with your people. It's going to be a legitimate 5 minutes. So open up, spread out. You can't wait me out here. I can stand the awkwardness, and then we'll come back in 5 minutes. So share around. All right, we're gonna bring it back to center. Hopefully, that was not as scary as you thought it would be. like I said, when you're an interim, when you're new, you can try new things. I'm always a fan of trying to make church more interactive. And one of the things that I have discovered or hear a lot about is that in this season, people are craving connection. And church is supposed to be one of those places where people connect. And yet, the way things are usually structured in a church environment, you can walk in, all these people are in theory your church family, and then you leave and you never interacted with them. And so, again, we won't do this kind of thing every week. I won't force that on you. But there is some value to trying to find ways to interact with each other while we're here and connect with each other while we're here. But I want to share with you guys about a season of my life that I felt extreme certainty about what God was doing, and then a following season, which actually just the first one rolled right into the next one, where I felt extremely uncertain about what God was doing, because certainty and uncertainty are really kind of at the core of what Luke is about. So in 2010, my youth pastor at the church that I had gotten saved at, and he was my mentor, and I was his intern, and all those things. He had left that church, and he had moved to a church in Toledo, Ohio, to be their high school pastor. And they were a really large church. They had a high school ministry of like 200 kids. They had a junior high ministry of like 150 kids. And he had gone to go be the high school pastor, and they were looking for a junior high pastor. And this church had really just been through the ringer. The reason they needed a high school and a junior high pastor is because they had two guys who were, they had been there over 10 years, and both of them had moral failures within 6 months of each other. And so, that happened, and then they hired some guys to replace them, and the guys that they hired to replace them didn't even last a year, and so they were just beat up, And so my youth pastor had been there about 6 months, and they still were looking, and they were still trying to find someone, and just not having any luck. And he was like, his name's Rob. He was like, I have this former student of mine, Stan. He was my intern. He's about to graduate. I think he has a lot of potential. He's only run things with me. He's never fully been in charge of things, but I think he might have a lot of potential. Do you want me to reach out to him and see if he'd be interested in applying? And I was in my last year of school, and so I was kind of not quite ready to apply for things, but if I got a job, I could, in theory, come back for a summer or something like that and finish up my degree. And so I submitted. He talked to me. I was like, okay, let's see what happens. I don't want to move to Ohio, but I'll do this for you, Rob. So I put in my application or sent in my resume, I should say, on a Friday. And over the weekend, they emailed me back, and they're like, hey, what about an interview on Monday? So I did the interview, and we get to the end of that, and they're like, how about a second interview? And I was like, oh, sure, when? And they're like, how about tomorrow? Okay, why not? So we do the second interview, and then they get back to me, it's Tuesday, and they're like, hey, we'd love to do an in-person interview. We'd love to fly you out and kind of wrap up the process and, see how you teach and these different things. So I was like, oh, yeah, that'd be cool. When are you guys thinking? And they go, well, here's the thing. So we have a camp coming up this weekend, and our speaker just backed out. And what are the odds that you would be willing to come out and be a camp speaker this weekend? And I was like, well, I work at a restaurant. I'm supposed to work, but if I can get my shifts covered, I'm happy to come do that for you. And so Wednesday, I spent all day talking to different people and friends and getting my shifts covered. And by Thursday morning, I had finally done it. And so I called them and I was like, all right, well, I'm available now. And they're like, great, we got a red eye for you. And they bought it. So, it's Thursday, take the red eye overnight on Thursday into Friday, land, and I go and teach this camp, and then we do the Friday, Saturday, Sunday thing, come back, do a couple interviews, catch the flight home, and land back into my normal life on Monday. And so, it was a real whirlwind of a process, and usually, when someone's interviewing you, they try and wine and dine you sort of thing. They just sent me into the middle of the woods with a bunch of junior high kids, and so it's a unique interview experience. And when I got on the plane to come home was really the first moment that I had any time to process any of that event. Like in a week, we had gone from, I've never even talked to these people, to suddenly I'm out there interviewing and all these things. And as I sat on the plane and finally had some space to process and just pray about it, I just felt this extremely clear sense from God that I was supposed to go to Ohio. Like, in terms of moments of my life where I would point to and go, this is a moment where God spoke, I would not point to a lot of them, right? I'm not one of those types of people who feels like God speaks at every, this very clear, audible sort of way at every point of my life. I feel like there's maybe a handful, and this is one of them. And so I just was so confident that I'm supposed to go to Ohio. And so, they process for the week and they come back to me and they basically say, well, here's the thing. We're a pretty big church. We've got a pretty big ministry. And there's a lot of emotional pain here, right, because of all the things that have happened. And you are great. We loved what you did for us this week. But at the same time, you have no experience. And so how would you feel about coming out for a year as the interim junior high pastor? And if it goes great, we would love to keep you on. We'd love to have you for a long-term season. And if it doesn't go great, we've kind of got a clear start and stop to this that we can say, hey, let's try this out for a season. It's not working out. You get some resume experience. We get some margin, all of those kinds of things. And, I didn't feel like that was unfair at all. Like, that was a very reasonable thing to ask of me and also a benefit for me. And so I said, sure, that sounds great. And so, again, mind you, I'm now moving to Ohio. I've never even seen snow, really. Right? I've seen snow like twice in my life. This is a very unusual decision to make for someone like me. But I just felt this clear sense from God that I'm supposed to be there. So I'm in no matter what the job offer is. So I quit my job, I start moving my stuff, I sell my car, I do all the things you have to do to move cross country. And the week before I'm supposed to get out there, the guy who's supposed to be my boss, my youth pastor was not going to be my boss, we had a guy who oversaw us, he calls me and he says, look, I know that we offered you a job, but I kept looking and I found someone that I really like and that I want to hire instead. And I've also already offered him a job. And I went to the elders and told them what I did, and they said, well, if we made someone else a job offer, or if we made Stan a job offer, just to make it clear, we need to find a way to honor that in some way, that if he still wants to come out, we will still have him and find a way to make it work. And he goes, so here's the deal. We do not want you. I just want to make it abundantly clear. He said this to me. I want to make it abundantly clear we do not want you. But if you want to come, we would bump you down to intern. We would reduce the salary to less than $1,000 a month. You can run the youth ministry until the guy gets here, but there's no long-term hope of a future job. You would just do the 1 year, and then we would say goodbye, and that would be it. But I remember him saying, but I cannot emphasize how much we do not want you to come. And I know, it was a great ego boost. But I just felt so clear that I was supposed to be there. And I was like, you know what? I will see you. I'll see you next week. I also had sold everything I had. So I also had nowhere else to go. I'd already changed my lease, all those things. So there was also some of that too. So I get out there and, kind of the original plan was like, well, this new guy, it's January. And this new guy is going to start at the end of the school year when he moves his family after they, get out of school and all that kind of stuff. So at the very least, I would get 6 months of just opportunity to run this ministry and just get some experience and all that kind of stuff. Well, 2 weeks later, he showed up. So now, all the reasons that I've come, all the purposes of being there, even the benefits that would have benefited me are no longer there. And none of these people know what to do with me at this point. So they're like, well, we really did not treat this guy right. We have him. What can we do? And so I don't know how much people know about Ohio. And my father-in-law's from Ohio. He says Ohio's a great place to be from. That's kind of the joke with it. You don't actually want to be there. And Toledo is kind of like, I don't know what the Washington equivalent of this is, but in California we say it's the Bakersfield of California. It's the armpit of California kind of thing. And so it's not really a place that people aspire to end up, but it is this university town. There's University of Toledo. There's a bunch of other smaller colleges. For everybody that grows up in Ohio, your dream is to go to Ohio State. And Toledo is like your safety school. It's like, well, I know that they'll take me no matter what. And so there's a lot of university kids, a lot of 18 to 23-year-olds that end up in Toledo, and they're from different parts of the state. And none of the churches in the city had a college ministry. Just unfathomable to me that there would be all these college kids in this town, and no one was doing anything with them. And for California, that was a very normal ministry to have as part of your church. And so our youth pastor and I went to them and said, well, how about we start a college ministry? And so we start this very first college ministry in this entire city. Now, maybe there had been other ones that had come and gone, but at that moment, there had been none. And it just blew up, just tons and tons of people coming to it. Because also what would happen is there were things like Campus Crusade that were happening at the universities, but they weren't attached to any local church. And so even just a little bit of outreach to them, suddenly all these kids at University of Toledo were trying to connect to a local church for the first time. And so we just had this amazing ministry out of nowhere all of a sudden. And I only had a 1-year contract. And so as that was wrapping up, I said, hey, what's the plan with this now that, like we're coming up on the last couple months here? And they're like, well, there's a lot going on. It's around Christmas season. Would you just stay on for 6 more months and we can figure out a long-term plan? Sure. I don't have anywhere to go. Why not? So I stay on for, I agree to that. And a couple months pass, and I go, hey, what's the plan with this? And they go, well, our dream would be that you just stay on forever. We would love to have you as the college pastor. We had no idea that we even needed this ministry. It's done so well. We would love to have you just be here. And I prayed about it, and I just felt like, I don't know that I'm really the right person for this. It has gone well, but I'm also 22. I'm not really supposed to be in charge of these people. I'm supposed to be with these people, out in the audience with them. And I'm so thankful that you guys like me and all those kinds of things, but I think we should transition this to someone else, because I also felt really called to being a junior high or high school pastor. And so that was great. It took us about 6 more months, so I ended up being there like 1 year and 10 months to do that whole transition and hand it off and do it well. And I still have a great relationship with people in that church. I go back and visit that church. My youth pastor is now the senior pastor over there. There were some really core relationships that developed and have become kind of a surrogate family for us. And yeah, it was a weird experience, but a great experience in a lot of ways. And I just thought, okay, how cool and weird of God to do things this way. I would have never applied for a college ministry job. I would have never sought out this type of thing. I would have never even considered going to Ohio. Not in the life plans that a 22-year-old Stan was ever putting together. And yet it was also very clear this is what God was trying to do. And at the same time, it kind of felt like this interruption, and now we're supposed to go back to the youth ministry plan that also felt very clear that that's what God was trying to do. And then I spent a year unemployed and just could not get any sort of headway into ministry. And it was this really weird season because, and this is not an exaggeration, I applied to almost 200 jobs. When you first are unemployed for a little bit, you only apply to the perfect scenario. And then as the months go on, you're just like, well, they have a pulse, why not them? Let's just start this process and see where it goes. And, I didn't think I was going to go to Ohio, but, then that happened. And, and so I would get, I would get interviews at a lot of those jobs. And at a lot of them, I would end up being the second best candidate. And it was this really weird experience where I would get rejected for really weird reasons. I remember one church that I was rejected at, they were they had 5 kids in their youth group. And they were I think we're just going to say no because you have too much experience. And I was like, I have not worked in 6 months. I would love to just have any experience with you guys. It's not the kind of thing that you would think your abundance of qualifications would hold you back. And, the season would go on. I ended up volunteering at this church and ended up, through a different story I won't get into now, becoming their interim pastor. And then they opened up the job and I applied and everybody wanted me to get it. And then I didn't get it. God, what are we doing here? And then my mom got stage 4 cancer. And it just was this just piling on of things. And you're trying to make sense of what God's doing. And you're on the one hand going, God, maybe you're trying to say, no, this is not for you. And yet there are other things that are saying, yes, this is for you. And it just was so unclear and uncertain. And, I'm going to be here for a while, so we'll get to talk about what happened next and different stories. But I just juxtapose those events as a season of my life that was really certain and a season of my life that was extremely uncertain. And like I said, certainty is at the core of what Luke is about. And so now we're going to actually get to the verses. And so if you've got a Bible, we're in Luke 1 through 4. And this is what he says in verses 1 through 3. He says, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus." So just we'll take a couple things there and then we'll look at verse 4. So one thing first to notice is he mentions this guy, Theophilus. And Theophilus is probably one of Luke's patrons. And he's someone who loves Jesus. And so he has commissioned Luke to go write an account of Jesus' life for him so that he can learn more about Jesus. And Luke says he's going to interview the eyewitnesses and take the oral tradition and that kind of stuff. But Theophilus also, it literally means friend of God. And so Theophilus is probably a real person, But Luke is writing in such a way that anyone who considers them a friend of God should be able to insert themselves into this situation and read this for themselves and go, oh, if I love Jesus, if I'm God's friend, something that Luke is writing is also for me. And that's kind of a very common system in this time period, to write with a specific person in mind, but write with the type of person that person represents in mind so that more and more people can find themselves in the story. And he says his methodology is that he's creating an orderly account. And what that means is that on some level it's chronological. Luke kind of gives the most attention to Jesus' birth that is compared to the other Gospels. He goes into the John the Baptist story and Mary and all the different things. And that's part of his purpose, is to kind of go to the beginning and kind of cover the long form of it. And the book of Acts ends up being the continuation of that. But the other thing he means by that is that he has a purpose and an agenda with this. He's not just writing as if it was like a newspaper account of here are the events, A plus B plus C plus D, just kind of going through them in a linear way. He has an agenda. He has a purpose. He has an outcome that he wants you to develop as a reader of it. He wants something for Theophilus. And all the gospel writers do this. Matthew in particular, he references the Old Testament a lot because he's trying to convince Jewish people that Jesus was the Messiah. So in verse 4, we'll see what Luke's purpose is. He says this, that you may have certainty concerning the things that you were taught. He says, Theophilus, you friend of God, I want you to have certainty concerning the things that you were taught. And the word there for certainty is the Greek word asphalia. So I'm going to say it again, and then I want you to say it. Asphalia. There you go. We're just making sure people are awake still. All right, asphalia. So what asphalia semantically ranges as is like security, certainty, confidence. Kind of the word picture image is that it is like bedrock. It is foundational. It is something that can't be broken or shaken. And Luke is saying, I want you to read this gospel and walk away with that kind of certainty about Jesus. I want you to know Jesus in such a way that he is this bedrock conviction about who you are, and that the things that you know about him are at the most core foundational level of yourself. Dallas Willard is a Christian philosopher, and he has this kind of framework for thinking about our convictions. And he says we all have public convictions, private convictions, and core convictions. And he says public convictions are the things that you say that you believe because you think it's what other people want to hear. And so, you're speeding, the cop pulls you over and says, how fast? Do you know how fast you were going? And you're like, I have no idea. I mean, you know how fast you were going, but the cop doesn't want to hear that. Or your spouse says, hey, when are you going to fix that? And you go, next week. You know that you're not going to finish it next week, but you know that she wants to hear that you're going to finish it next week, right? Like that's a very public conviction sort of thing that we all run into. A private conviction is a thing that you believe until it gets tested, or until it gets difficult, or until it becomes inconvenient. So I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase NIMBY. NIMBY stands for not in my backyard. And it's often used in the political sphere where someone will advocate for a position until it starts to affect their life. And so a very common example is affordable housing. Everyone loves affordable housing. We all just go, yeah, that's something great. Until it means that they're going to build it in your neighborhood and your property values are going to go down. And then you're like, well, why don't you build that in Everett instead? And that's a very NIMBY sort of thing. Some people do believe it until it starts to become difficult for them. But while Willard says, there is something called core convictions, something that all of us believe at the most convictional way, that at the core of who we are, it's never going to be violated. It's never going to be shaken. It's never going to cause you to compromise. And that's what Luke has in mind with asphalia. That's what he wants for all of us, is to read his gospel and to go, I believe in Jesus at such a core level. There's nothing that can ever shake that for me. And in fact, I'm building my entire life on it. And so here's what we're going to do for the rest of the sermon. I'm going to show you a video for a second, and then I'll come back and talk about conviction one more time. But this is from the Bible Project. The Bible Project is this nonprofit that makes explainer videos of biblical themes or biblical books or things like that. And again, if this is my only Sunday with you, the one thing you should ever take away from my time here is the Bible Project. You will just benefit so much from it. But they're just going to kind of give us an overview of the first 8 chapters of Luke, so we'll kind of get a preview of what we're going to see over the next few weeks. And like I said, I'm going to come back up after the video, and we'll just do a little application on what we've talked about this morning.
The Gospel according to Luke It's one of the earliest accounts of Jesus' life, and it's actually part one of a unified 2-volume work, Luke, Acts. If you compare the opening lines of both of these books, it's clear that they come from the same author, and there are internal clues in the book of Acts, as well as an early tradition that identifies the author as Luke, the traveling companion and co-worker of Paul the Apostle, who we know was also a doctor. Luke opens his work with a preface telling us how and why he wrote this book. He acknowledges that there's many other fine accounts of Jesus' life out there, but he wanted to go back to the eyewitness traditions of as many early disciples as he could, in order to produce what he calls an orderly account about the things that have been fulfilled among us. Now that word fulfilled shows us why Luke wrote this account. For him, the story of Jesus isn't just ancient history. He wants to show how it's the fulfillment of the long covenant story of God and Israel, and bigger than that, of the story of God in the whole world. The book's design is fairly clear. There's a long introduction that sets up the stories of John the Baptist and Jesus. Then in chapters 3 to 9, Luke presents a robust portrait of Jesus and his mission in his home region of Galilee. After that, the large midsection of the book is Jesus' long journey to Jerusalem, which leads to the story's climax, Jesus' final week in Jerusalem leading up to his death and resurrection, which then leads on into the book of Acts. In this video, we're just going to focus on the first half of Luke's gospel. The extended introduction tells in parallel the birth stories of John the Baptist and Jesus. So you have this elderly priestly couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and then this young unmarried woman, Mary and Joseph. They both receive an unlikely divine promise that they're going to have a son. Both promises are fulfilled then, as John and then Jesus are born, and both parents sing poems of celebration. Now these poetic songs, they're filled with echoes from the Old Testament, Psalms and prophets, showing how these children will fulfill God's ancient promises. But these poems also preview each child's role in the story to follow. So John is the prophetic messenger promised in the Torah and the prophets who's going to prepare Israel to meet their God. And Jesus, he's the messianic king promised to David, who's going to bring God's reign over Israel and God's blessing to the nations, just like he promised to Abraham. After this, Mary brings Jesus to the Jerusalem temple for his dedication, and two elderly prophets, Anna and Simeon, they see Jesus and they recognize who he is. And Simeon sings his own song, a poem inspired by the prophet Isaiah. He says, "This child is God's salvation for Israel, and he will become a light to the nations." So with all this anticipation, the story moves forward into the next main section, where Luke presents Jesus and his mission. He sets the stage with John's renewal movement at the Jordan River, where he's calling a new, repentant, recommitted Israel into existence through baptism. He's preparing for the arrival of God's kingdom. And then Jesus appears as the leader of this new Israel, and he's marked out by the Spirit and the voice of God from heaven. He is the beloved Son of God. After this, Luke follows with the genealogy, and it traces Jesus' origins back to David, then back to Abraham, and then all the way back to Adam from the book of Genesis. Luke's claiming here that Jesus is the messianic king of Israel who will bring God's blessing, but not only to Israel, the family of Abraham. He is here for all the sons of Adam, for all humanity. After this, Luke has strategically placed the story of Jesus going to his hometown Nazareth, where he launches his public mission. At a synagogue gathering, Jesus stands up and he reads from the scroll of Isaiah, saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to preach good news to the poor and freedom for the prisoners, new sight for the blind and freedom for the oppressed." Now, along with the other Gospels, Jesus is presented here, he's the Messianic King bringing the good news of God's kingdom. But what Luke uniquely highlights are the social implications of Jesus' mission. So he brings freedom. The Greek word is aphesis. It literally means release, and it refers to the ancient Jewish practice of the year of Jubilee described in Leviticus 25. It's when all Israelite slaves were released, when people...
Well, we'll maybe find a way to show the rest of it next week or something. But you kind of get some idea of where we're going. Yeah, that's all right. So kind of returning to our original idea on certainty. I was talking to a professor of mine about this and just prepping for it. And the question he kind of helped me wrestle with and kind of advised as I went into this was to just think about what kind of person benefits from having certainty. What kind of person benefits from having certainty? And the initial reaction is people who are suffering or people who are facing the unknown or uncharted territory, or they're at a fork in the road and they've got to decide which way to go, or people who are in transition, and all kind of categories of persons that are struggling. But also people in abundance need certainty too, because without Jesus at the bedrock, you won't know how to use those resources or see what God's doing in your life because you don't have a lot of felt needs. But also the abundance we have might become a hindrance to following Jesus. And so Luke is this book that is for everyone in every stage and in every season of life, because it's really more about, are you a friend of God? If you're a friend of God, then everything about Jesus is going to benefit you. And the circumstances that you are in kind of come and go, and different seasons happen. But Luke is also going to expose for us what the process of developing certainty is and what we actually need in certainty. Right, like the seasons of my life was, I still had, when I got into that hard season of being unemployed and my mom had cancer and things like that, God had not changed, but I wrestled with God a lot in that. And there was still a whole process that I had to go through. And even as coming off a season where I had a ton of certainty about God, that I still had more to grow in, is all I'm saying. But Luke will also expose for us, there are a lot of things in our mind that we think, if I just had this from God, I would be totally confident for him. And Luke is going to say, actually, it's about something else entirely. We're going to learn to develop faith. We're going to learn to develop trust. We're going to learn to develop a confidence in God that transcends the circumstances. So I'm going to invite JJ to come on up, and we're going to do our last song, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of invitational homework before next week. So one thing I would love for you to do, and again, I'm not going to follow up, but I would love for you to do it, is spend some time reading Luke 1. We'll be in it for a couple weeks. It's about 80 verses. That's much longer than you remember it being. So, it'll take us a few weeks to get through it. So read it, come into it. The more that you've saturated your mind in it, the more you will benefit from hearing kind of an exposition around it. But the second thing would be just to take some time in introspection and to ask yourself, God, where are there parts of my life that I'm still uncertain about you? Where are the seasons or the things that I'm going through that I still don't have confidence in you? And bring those into our Sundays, because the Holy Spirit wants to do something there. And so to just spend some time in learning and spend some time in introspection, and to come prepared that God wants to do something with you every Sunday that you're here. So let me pray, and then we'll worship a little bit more, and that'll be our morning. Lord, we just thank you for this time that we can come and worship you. We thank you for the opportunity to learn about you and to just learn about the God who is so worth trusting and so worth building our life upon. We pray for all of us that as we open up your gospel, that we would just leave here more in love and more confident in you. In your name, amen.
Let's stand.